At a grocery counter, a careful grandmother lifted her receipt toward the light and read it line by line while the cashier waited. She was not trying to make a scene. She was making sure the paper matched what had actually changed hands. That quiet habit belonged to a larger way of moving through the world, and the most important version of it comes at the end. She learned these habits not from fear, but from a lifetime of handling what was hers with steady hands. Each small check was a stitch in a fabric that kept her household safe. And the quietest habits were the ones that mattered most. Before she ever left the counter, she matched each line on the receipt to the groceries in her cart. A can of beans, a bag of flour, a dozen eggs. She touched each one as she read. The cashier might sigh, but she knew a mistake caught early was a penny saved from confusion later. Without scanners or instant banking alerts, the counter was where the evidence was freshest. At the counter, she placed the receipt beside the paper sack and touched each line with the blunt end of her pencil. A doubled item was easier to settle while the basket was still nearby than after the walk home. The habit felt ordinary because she practiced it without announcing it. She watched the register display like a hawk. If a shelf tag said a can of soup was on sale, she made sure the screen showed that same price before the total appeared. More than once, she caught a difference, a sale price that hadn't been entered, a discount that didn't apply. A quiet word with the cashier, and it was fixed. Paper sale cards were changed by hand, so yesterday's marking could outlive a clerk's memory. She knew the shelf card and the register were two separate promises. If the total changed, she calmly asked the cashier to look again, with the little red sale sticker still visible in her mind. A small pause at the counter could save a larger explanation later. When the cashier handed her change, she didn't just shove it into her purse. She counted it in her palm, coins first, then bills, while the receipt lay flat on the counter. Only when the amount matched did she tuck it into an old leather wallet. That receipt stayed with her until the purchase cleared her bank statement, a paper trail she could follow if anything went wrong. Cash gave no later notification. Once she stepped outside, the register drawer had already closed. The receipt stayed folded in its own pocket, a small paper trail if the charge looked different later. The old purse had a place for coins, receipts, and questions still waiting for answers. Once a month, she sat at the kitchen table with her bank statement and a pencil. She read each line, from the grocery store charge to the electric bill. If a number didn't match her memory or her ledger, she circled it. Then she'd call the bank, her voice calm but firm, and ask for an explanation. That monthly review was her fence against errors and fraud, a quiet ritual that kept her money where it belonged. Paper statements arrived after purchases had become old memories, which made her ledger the second witness. Familiar names received a small mark, an unfamiliar one received a question rather than a shrug. She trusted familiar handwriting more than a mysterious line she could not place. One evening, she spotted a charge on her credit card statement for a subscription she didn't recognize. It was a small amount, easy to overlook. But she didn't ignore it. She called the company, asked what it was for, and when they couldn't explain, she disputed it. That charge disappeared, and she learned to question anything that didn't belong to her household. A recurring fee you don't remember is a lake that needs plugging. In an earlier bill, it might have been a club or mail-order plan. Now it can hide behind an automatic renewal. She watched for the small repetition, the kind of leak a household noticed only after it had become a habit. The repeated mark was easy to miss, until she gave the page her full attention. The phone rang one afternoon, and a voice claimed to be from her bank, asking for her account number to verify a suspicious charge. She didn't hesitate. She hung up. Then she found the bank's number on her statement and called them herself. There was no suspicious charge. That call was a trick, and she knew that an unexpected request for information was a reason to stop, not to comply. There was no caller ID screen to reassure her, and a familiar tone was not proof. The silence after she hung up gave her room to check the matter on her own terms. The room became quieter once the unexpected voice was no longer in charge. If a message on her answering machine asked her to call back about an urgent matter, she rarely used the number they left. She went to the card in her wallet or the statement on her desk and dialed the number printed there. She knew that a caller ID could be faked, but a number she looked up herself was a path she could trust. Returning a call through official channels was her way of keeping control. The habit survived the move from paper statements to banking apps. She chose the route, not the caller. She kept the statement in a drawer by the phone, so a convincing caller could not choose the route back into her home. Her own paperwork gave her a calm path back to the institution. At the beauty parlor or the church social, she listened more than she talked. When conversations turned to personal details, account numbers, birth dates, household matters, she changed the subject or simply smiled and stayed quiet. She knew that loose talk could wander into the wrong ears. Keeping her private information private was a habit as natural as locking the front door at night. Beauty parlor talk felt harmless, but names, routines, and family details could travel well beyond the room. Privacy was simply another household door she knew how to close. A mailer arrived, offering a free trial of a magazine. It looked tempting, but she turned it over and read the fine print. Then she asked herself, what happens after the trial ends? She called the company and found out the subscription would automatically renew at a high rate. She declined. She knew that free often came with a hook, and she always asked what the offer would cost once the introductory period was over. A mail offer could be filed away and forgotten while the renewal kept moving. The delay was part of the trap. She let the answer sit beside the offer before her purse opened. Her questions made the offer explain itself, which was often revealing. When a salesman came to the door with a contract for a new service, she didn't sign on the spot. She invited him to leave the papers, then sat at her desk with a bright lamp and read each clause. The small print wasn't decoration, it was where the real terms hid. She underlined anything she didn't understand and called the company for clarification. Only when she was satisfied did she consider signing. Under the kitchen lamp, she moved the page nearer and farther until the small type settled into focus. A magnifying glass, a quiet room, and patience were better companions than a hurried signature. The lamp turned a hurried decision into a slow, readable one. Before she agreed to anything a salesperson promised, she wrote it down. If they said the warranty covered parts and labor, she asked them to repeat it while she noted it on a pad. Then she asked if it was in the written agreement. She knew that spoken words could evaporate, but a note in her own hand was a reminder she could refer back to. Writing down the promise was her way of pinning it to the truth. A promise written during the conversation exposed any difference between sales talk and the printed agreement. The act changed a passing assurance into something she could compare with the bill that arrived later. The envelope became a memory aid when memories disagreed. When a bill arrived for work done on the house, she didn't just write a check. She pulled out the original agreement and compared each line. The labor, the materials, the dates, the full set had to match. Once she found an extra charge for a part that was rarely installed. She called the contractor and they removed it. That habit of comparing the invoice to the agreement saved her from paying for things she rarely received. The agreement showed what had been authorized. The invoice showed what someone now expected her to accept. The papers made a conversation visible, including the parts someone might prefer to leave vague. 2 sheets of paper could settle what a confident voice left uncertain. A bill came in the mail that looked official, but it was addressed to a name she didn't recognize. It could have been a simple mistake, but she didn't assume. She called the company and confirmed it wasn't hers. Then she wrote "not at this address" and sent it back. She knew that paying a bill that wasn't hers could entangle her in someone else's problem. Returning the envelope kept a clerical error from turning into a payment history attached to the wrong household. An envelope with her name on it still had to belong to her household. She checked the address, the service, and the reason before allowing an automatic habit to move money out the door. A name on an envelope was not proof that the obligation belonged to her. A knock at the door brought a man with a clipboard, urging her to sign a petition. He was in a hurry, pushing the pen toward her. She stepped back. She didn't sign anything without reading it, and she rarely let someone else's urgency rush her pen. Her signature was her bond, and she protected it like the key to her home. The same went for her checkbook and cards. They stayed in her sight or locked away. Unlike cash, a signature could keep creating obligations long after the visitor had left the porch. A checkbook stayed in its drawer, a card stayed in her purse, and another person's emergency did not become her permanent obligation. Kindness did not require handing over the keys to her future. When a company offered a discount for paying annually instead of monthly, she didn't jump at the savings. She asked for the written terms, read the cancellation policy, and made sure the total was clear. Then she considered if she could afford to lock up that money for a year. Only when the terms and total were transparent did she choose the annual bill. She knew that a lower price wasn't a bargain if the terms were murky. Annual payment moved more money at once, so cancellation and renewal terms mattered as much as the advertised saving. The calendar mattered less than understanding what service was covered when it renewed and what the total actually included. Clarity came before convenience on her calendar. In a simple ledger, she wrote down each expense, the date, the amount, the purpose. It wasn't fancy, just a notebook with columns. But when a charge appeared on her statement that she didn't recognize, she could flip through the pages and see if it matched. That handwritten record was her memory made visible, a place where a missing charge had nowhere to hide. The ledger was her quiet partner in keeping things straight. Because the notebook followed her own order, an unfamiliar mark stood out faster than it did on a crowded statement. Its value appeared when one mark did not belong with the others and could be investigated early. The notebook made ordinary patterns visible. At the doctor's office, the receptionist handed her a bill with a fee she didn't understand. Instead of just paying, she asked, "Could you explain this charge?" Her voice was calm, not confrontational. The receptionist looked it up and realized it was a coding error. One question saved her money and cleared up confusion. She knew that asking a calm question when something was unclear was a right, not a nuisance. A vague fee often became clearer when someone had to name the service, date, and reason aloud. The person across from her sometimes reached for a smoother explanation, which was useful information in itself. A plain question protected her better than a polite guess. A young relative asked her to co-sign a loan. She loved him dearly, but she said no. She explained that lending her name meant lending her credit, and if something went wrong, she'd be on the hook. It was a hard conversation, but she knew that protecting her financial health was a way of protecting her ability to help in other ways. Refusing to be a guarantor wasn't unkind, it was wise. Co-signing joined her record to a debt she could not control, even when the request came from someone she trusted. She listened with affection, then kept her name attached to obligations she had personally read and understood. She could care about someone without signing what she had not read. A teenager came to the door collecting for a charity she'd rarely heard of. He had a badge and a story, but she didn't open her wallet. She asked for a brochure and said she'd mail a check after she verified the organization. Then she called the charity's listed number to confirm the fundraiser was real. It wasn't. That knock on the door taught her to verify before giving, no matter how convincing the story. A uniform, badge, or clipboard was appearance. A publicly listed office and return call were evidence. She asked for details she could verify independently, and closed the door before deciding whether the story deserved money. A closed door gave her time to check the story. Before a handyman started a repair, she wrote down what he promised to do and how much it would cost. She asked him to look at the note and agree. Then she taped it to the refrigerator. When the work was done, she compared the note to the bill. That simple piece of paper prevented misunderstandings and kept the work on track. Writing down the price and scope before the work began was her blueprint for a fair deal. Before tools crossed the threshold, both people could still agree on what counted as finished work. The note protected both sides from a memory that changed once the tools were already on the porch. The notepad kept the work from changing shape halfway through. At a restaurant, when the server took her card to pay, she watched it until it returned. At a store, she kept her card in her hand until the transaction was complete. She knew that a card out of sight could be copied or misused in seconds. Keeping her payment card in view was a simple habit that protected her from a world of trouble. Her eyes on the card were her first line of defense. A copied number could travel without the card. The risk changed shape, but visibility still mattered. The little movement of the card rarely disappeared behind a doorway or into a back room without explanation. Visibility was part of the transaction, not an accusation. The salesman at her door said the offer was only good for today. She felt the pressure, but she didn't budge. She told him she needed time to think, and if the offer was real, it would still be there tomorrow. He left, and she rarely heard from him again. That pause saved her from a rushed decision. Letting a pressured purchase wait until there was time to think was her shield against regret. After he left, she set the brochure beside the fruit bowl, made tea, and let the pressure lose its power before she chose anything. Time was the one thing pressure could not borrow from her. In the end, these habits came down to one quiet rule: wait when pressure is doing the talking. When the world pushed for an answer, she paused. When a voice on the phone demanded action, she hung up. When a signature was urged, she read first. The grandmother at the grocery counter, holding her receipt to the light, was practicing that lesson in its simplest form. Hurry makes room for mistakes. A careful pause keeps what is yours safe. That was her gift, and it is one that still belongs in our hands.